I will review our progress so far and discuss the outlook and the uncertainties we face as we pursue our
老包来了，记得大家给他刷一波666。
I will conclude with a summary of what this means for policy.
现在他在做 opening remarks， 也就
Given
是
how far we have come,
开始的这个
we are in a
演
position
词
to。proceed carefully as we assess the incoming data and the evolving outlook and risks. The ongoing episode of high inflation initially emerged from a collision between very strong demand and pandemic-constrained supply.
长需求还有那
By the
个
time
疫
the
情的问题影响了通胀。
FOMC raised the policy rate in March 2022, it was
老
clear
包在
that
讲历
bringing
史。
down inflation would depend on both the unwinding of the unprecedented pandemic-related demand and supply distortions and on our tightening of monetary policy, which would slow the growth of aggregate demand, allowing supply time to catch up. While these two forces are now working together to bring down inflation, the process still has
他
a
觉
long
得
way
经
to
济
go.
在进行一个平衡，就是看这个需求和供应在做一个平衡。自疫情之后
On a 12-month basis, U.S. total or headline PCE inflation peaked at 7% in June 2022.
我刚刚说的核心 PCE 比较重要 ,7.0 作为峰
as
值
of。July, following a trajectory roughly in line with global trends. The effects of Russia's war against Ukraine have been a primary
俄
driver
战争
of the changes in headline inflation around
对于
the world
headline 的通胀有很大的一个影响。
since early 2022.
开头指数刚刚已经冲破4400
Headline
了。
inflation is what households and businesses experience most directly, so this decline is very good news.
Headline 通胀往下走，对于每家每户是非常好的一个消息，因为这个对于大家的每天的影响比较大。
signal of where inflation is headed. And in my remaining comments, I will focus on core PCE inflation, which omits the food and energy components.
核心 PCE 是劳包的主要
On a
的这个
12-month basis,
观点
core。PCE inflation peaked at 5.4% in February 2022.
2月2022年的时候，核心 PCE 到了 5.4 左右，这个是没有食物和
The
能源
lower
的
monthly readings
影
for
响里
core
面。
inflation in June and July were welcome. But 2 months of good data are only the beginning of what it will take to build confidence that inflation is moving down sustainably toward our goal.
他说2个月的好的数据呢，不是就是可以代表那个一切。之前他也是这样子去说过，需要看到更加多的。
12-month core inflation is still elevated, and there is substantial further ground to cover to get back to price stability.
这些言辞比较鹰派，不是这么好。他说12个月的通胀呢还是比较高。
Further progress, it is useful to separately examine the 3 broad components of core PCE inflation: inflation for goods, for housing services, and for all other services, sometimes referred to as non-housing services. Core goods inflation has fallen sharply, particularly for durable goods.
Goods 就是物价，耐久品的这个物价是跌了不少。特斯拉的汽车算是在耐久品里面的。昨天耐久品数据需求显示上去了。
Earlier in the pandemic, demand for vehicles rose sharply.
正好讨论汽车了。他说，在那个通胀高的时候，需求对于车子急剧上涨，二手车的价格。
Away from using public transportation and from living in cities. But because of a shortage of semiconductors, vehicle supply actually fell. Vehicle prices spiked, and a
他
large
说，
pool of
价格往
pent-up
上走，
demand
车价来说的话，是因为那个供应少了。
As the pandemic and its effects have waned, production and inventories have grown, and supply has improved. At the same time, higher
现
interest
在
rates
库存
have
提
weighed
高了，
on
所以
demand.
价格开始稳定一下了。
Interest rates on auto loans have nearly doubled since early last year, and customers report feeling the effect of higher rates on affordability.
但是利率上去了
On
不
net,
少，
motor vehicle
因为美联
inflation
储
has
加息了
declined。sharply because of the combined effects of these supply and demand factors. Similar dynamics are playing out for core goods inflation overall. As they do, the effects of monetary restraint should show through more fully over time.
刚刚华尔街不是很喜欢他说的那个比较鹰派的一个致辞
But
啊
on a，
这会儿已
12-month
经开始
basis, core
指数
goods
砸下来一
inflation
点。
remains well above its pre-pandemic level. Sustained progress is needed, and restrictive monetary policy is called for to achieve that progress.
刚刚这个言辞非常
In
鹰
the
派，意
highly
思就是
interest-sensitive
更加
housing
那
sector,
个
the effects
限
of
制性的
monetary
这个货币
policy
政策
became
呢是
apparent
需要有
soon after liftoff. Mortgage rates doubled over
他要
the
看到
course of
持续性的通胀往下走。
2022, causing housing starts and sales to fall and house price growth to plummet.
房贷利率呢还是维持在一个高的位置，现在，所以我们看到房产这一边呢，增长也是比较慢。暂时它的言辞是偏鹰的。好，现在在讨论 OE（Owners Equivalent Rent），也就是那个对 shelter 通胀组合里面最大的一个成分。最近这个租金总算下来了，但是是最近才开始。老包在这里再次的强调，就是要见到维持性的。
Going forward, if market rent growth settles near pre-pandemic levels, housing services inflation should decline toward its pre-pandemic level as well.
这个还好，就是说那个房价的这个出租这些价格是会渐渐的下来但是还是需要一段时间。
The final category, non-housing services, accounts for over half of the core PCE index.
非房务业的非 shelter 的这一方面的这个通胀。像那个食物业健康、医疗业，他觉得在这个服务业方面的这一个移动性是很盘暂时。他觉得这个起码没有往上涨，还是 encouraging， 还是挺鼓励的，挺振奋的。
And are generally thought to be less interest sensitive than other sectors, such as housing or durable goods. Production of these services is also
服务业和这一个房屋的这个价格，对于通胀现在来说是主要的一个影响为那个老包说一下。
Over time, restrictive monetary policy will help bring aggregate supply and demand back into better balance, reducing inflationary pressures.
有限制性的货币政策呢，能帮助供应和需求恢复正常。
Turning then to the outlook, although further unwinding of
先看一下
pandemic-related
前
distortions
瞻预期。
should continue to put some downward pressure on inflation, restrictive monetary policy will likely play an increasingly important role.
指数还是3个全部都是绿的，现在已经开始回暖了。因为刚刚他说了一些对于这个就是没有这么偏鹰的这个致辞。现在还没有讨论就业市场，但是应该开始了啊。现在金融的市场呢是被限制高利率。
And longer-term real yields are higher as well, by nearly 150 basis points. Beyond changes in interest rates, bank lending standards have tightened, and loan growth has slowed sharply.
现在贷款的利率呢是缩紧了非常的多，这会造成经济发展的慢速减慢。工业的生产呢开始已经慢下来了。
We are attentive to signs that the economy may not be cooling as expected. So far this year,
但是
GDP growth has come
美
in
联储
above
这边是观察到
expectations,
可能经济
and
没有
above
想
its
象中的
longer-run
慢下来
trend.
这么多，
And recent readings
就是
on
代表经济
consumer
还是有
spending
韧
have
性
been
了。
especially robust. In addition,
指
after
数进一步
decelerating
回暖。
sharply over the past 18 months, the housing sector is showing signs of picking back up.
最近呢，这一个房地产这一边呢，好像又开始去往上再走了啊。这个不好。刚刚说那个，因为在这里有这种回暖的迹象，就是有可能需要更加受禁这个货币政策，所以指数应该这样子就被打压一下。刚刚那句话非常的不好，就是代表还要就是看那个加息的那个措施，有可能吧，有可能慢一些。这些他说的都是有可能不是一定会发生的。他说就业的这个数据来说的话，现在那个空缺的这个职位呢还是多的，但是开始就是往下走一点。他觉得就业市场正在正常化，恢复到疫情的之前。这个就会让时薪增长的一个方面呢就开始慢下来，因为你工资少的话，需求下去的话，那么通胀自然会下去。 指数渐渐回去了，快到4400了，4397现在。他觉得劳工市场的这个会继续的重新平衡。4399。4400，基本上走了一个寂寞啊，指数暂时。2%还是我们的通胀目标，真的不能3%吗？包爷爷。
It is challenging, of course, to know in real time when such a stance has been achieved. There are some challenges that are common to all tightening cycles. For example, real interest rates are now positive and well above mainstream estimates of the neutral policy rate. We see the current stance of policy as restrictive, putting downward pressure on economic activity.
We see the current policy as restricted. 他觉得现在的这一个策略呢已经有限制性的了，这个是我们想听到的一个答案，就是代表你不用进一步的去加息，去达到打压这一个需求，所以这一个对市场非常的好。就我们在找加息的步伐，他刚刚说那句话非常的好，对于主力。
Since the symposium a year ago, the committee has raised the policy rate by 300 basis points, including 100 basis points over the past 7 months.
自去年加息后，又提高了300基准点的利率。
The wide range of estimates of these lags suggests that there may be significant further drag in the pipeline.
他觉得这里是有个延缓的作用的，所以我们可能后面还会看到高利率的这一个效果。好了，这里已经开始偏鸽了，指数已经开始上去了，4407。
So far, job openings have declined substantially without increasing unemployment, a highly welcome but historically unusual result that appears to reflect large.
他觉得现在劳工市场非常的有意思，因为这一个劳工市场没有跌得这么快啊，虽然是做了比较有这一个限制性的货币政策。
These changing dynamics may or may not persist, and this uncertainty
他不知道这个能不能持久。
Agile policymaking. These uncertainties, both old and new,
对，我觉得不鸽不鹰，因为他两边都在说，后面都是偏鸽现在，所以指数已经开始往上冲了，4412了。
Doing too little could allow above target inflation to become entrenched and ultimately require monetary policy to wring more persistent inflation from the economy at a high cost to employment. Doing too much could also do unnecessary harm to the economy.
如果做的太多，会对经济带来一些就是他不想制造出来的一个麻烦。这个挺好的，就是代表可能是已经到了啊。他的意思就是有可能这个加息就加到头了。
We will assess our progress based on the totality of the data and the evolving outlook and risks. Based on this assessment, we will proceed carefully as we decide whether to tighten further or instead to hold the policy rate constant.
这句话很重要，他们会在未来的会议呢继续非常小心的去看，现在维持这个利率对不对？是不是足够就是去控制这个通胀？
And we will keep at it until the job is done. Thank you.
他们会继续直到这一份工作是已经结束了，这个之前他都会说的。